Live everywhere.
Daily Co's Radio on netrootsradio.com presents
David Waldron. Kagro in the Morning Show. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Monday, October 7th, 2019. Time for another show. In fact, time for another week of shows. This should be really exciting. We survived the weekend. That's good news. And we're not always guaranteed that that's going to be the case. And it was actually a relatively quiet weekend. This despite the fact that Trump did not get to the golf course and did spend most of the weekend at home panic tweeting about his impending impeachment. It just didn't penetrate at all. He just was kind of shouting into the wind, which was fantastic. I think things are catching on. People are beginning to learn to ignore him. There's still plenty to pay attention to, of course, and plenty of incriminating evidence that he's providing in his tweets. But it didn't seem to dominate everyone's thinking in the same way that it has in the past. And that's good news. Everyone stayed focused. They stayed on topic. They continued to talk about the need to impeach this president and the horrible things that he's doing. And it wasn't until late last night that we really got to that development that we were all waiting for that would make things significantly worse, both here at home and around the world. Word came last night that we're still catching up on this, and we'll have to read the early printed published reports about what exactly is going on, but it appears that at some point, like during a phone call or something like that, President Trump has worked something out with the president of Turkey, President Erdogan, and it appears, we'll be abandoning our Kurdish allies in the big fight against ISIS. ISIS, of course, as you know, has been totally destroyed, totally on schedule, too. I think they were supposed to be gone 30 days into the new administration, but whatever. Anyway, apparently they're completely destroyed, and a lot of the work, of course, was done by our Kurdish allies who live to this point nationless in the north of Syria and in the east of Turkey and all over the place. There's Kurdish populations in Iraq and into Iran, and I'm not even certain I have them all covered in that way. But at any rate, like we've said, they've been sort of nationless, stateless for a long time, and it's been an issue for the world, but for all the countries, modern countries in which they live. They have a particular problem, as it turns out, in Turkey, where the Turkish regime is plenty hostile to them and apparently intends to wipe them out. And part of our agreement to get the Kurds to take on the brunt of fighting ISIS, which they take on following their having taken on a large role in fighting in the north of Iraq during the Second Gulf War. They're doing a lot of heavy lifting there. Well, on the other hand, they were fighting already, so it wasn't like we asked them to quit their day jobs and become soldiers. But still, all indications are, and I mean it, all indications, there isn't anybody saying this is a good idea so far, Republican or Democrat here at home. I guess the Turks are, the Turkish military, I guess, thinks it's a good idea, but we're not listening to them at this point yet. Anyway, so having convinced them to fight ISIS, we also at some point convinced them to tear down their defensive barriers on the Turkish border, the Kurdish population living in Syria, which they had erected as a defense against Turkish incursion against them. They didn't want to be fighting on one front against ISIS, only to have the Turks sneak up behind them and wipe them out. But we somehow convinced them that they should tear those defensive positions down because we would have their backs. And then Donald Trump decided, I will not have your back. I will leave instead, and I'll talk to the president of Turkey who wants to wipe you out about it and let him know that we're doing it. and all systems go. So we've got some work now. Dave Gilligan has an excellent suggestion. He tweets me using the KITM hashtag this morning. The Kurds should very quickly announce an investigation into Joe and Hunter Biden. That might solve things. I think you're right. Okay. Time to get around to this and organize our thoughts. Greg Dworkin is standing by with a raft of stories. Bill in Portland, Maine lets you know today's secret $10,000 mystery phrase in his morning tweet, letting you know that the show is live today. The mystery phrase is "fumfering idiot." I wrote that phrase again. Fumfering idiot. And then Greg calls. I didn't mean for it to go that way. I'll tell you all about who that fumfering idiot is and see if any of you can win the prize. That was something that was tweeted over the weekend, and I'll clear it up later on. I'm sure we'll be talking about all sorts of international affairs today, because that's what'll be done. That dominates the domestic affairs today. Good morning, Greg. How you doing?
Good morning. Well, there's a lot to talk about,
yes,
including whistleblowers and people who are
guys.
in Congress.
Right, them.
So it's a little bit of everything there.
Yeah, we got a bit of everything. People are beginning to talk about the Turkey decision and or the Kurdish decision.
Well, they're waking up to it, right? And don't forget this lovely April 20th from April 20th, 2012 tweet from Ivanka. Thank you, Prime Minister Erdogan, for joining us yesterday to celebrate the launch of Trump Towers, Istanbul. So
there is
at least, I don't know if it's built. I don't know if they ever build anything, but maybe the Kurds can take refuge there.
That's a great idea. We should book the block of rooms. Actually, that's not a bad idea as a prank.
Because if it is, it might be empty.
Yeah, well, that's true. I don't know.
Most of his
find out if it's built. But we could call the Trump hotel in D.C. and we should book the whole thing and say we're the Kurds and we're coming over and we need a place to stay, and we'll see whether that affects things. Maybe that might keep them alive. I don't know. If they don't pay, it might get them killed faster. I'm not sure.
Well, Trump appointed a special envoy to help deal with this. His name was Brett McGurk. Why don't we ask him what he thinks about all of this? Here he is on Twitter telling us what he thinks about all of this.
Yeah, I asked him and he answered. Yes.
Yeah, he says Donald Trump is not a commander-in-chief. He makes impulsive decisions with no knowledge or deliberation. He sends military personnel into harm's way with no backing. He blusters and then leaves our allies exposed when adversaries call his bluff or he confronts a hard phone call. The White House statement tonight on Syria after Trump spoke with Erdogan, and there is the actual statement if one is interested in looking at it, demonstrates a complete lack of understanding of anything happening on the ground. The United States is not holding ISIS detainees. They are all being held by the SDF, which is the Kurdish forces, which Trump just served up to Turkey. Turkey has neither the intent, desire, nor capacity to manage 60,000 detainees in the camp, which State and Department of Defense Inspector Generals warn is the nucleus for a resurgent ISIS. Believing otherwise is a reckless gamble with our national security. And then, of course, he gives background. The Turkish proposed safe zone, which would effectively extend Turkey's border 30 kilometers into Syria, including areas of Christians, Kurds, and other vulnerable minorities. Our diplomats were working with a plan to forestall such a debacle. Where is Pompeo? Well, Pompeo is busy lawyering up is where Pompeo is.
Oh.
Indeed, U.S. officials signed the SDF up to a security mechanism plan by which it removed all defensive barriers, you were just talking about this, on the Syrian side of the border to forestall a Turkish incursion. And was Trump ever even briefed on this plan? Trump made a similarly impulsive decision when I was managing the policy. This is something he knows a little bit about. In fact, I resigned over it, he said, and stand by every word in the op-ed he wrote. Tonight is a sad replay, but seems even worse as U.S. officials have since convinced the SDF that we plan to stay. So, true betrayal.
Oh, dang.
Well, Lindsey Graham heard about this.
Oh, he did?
Yeah, he wants to send a sternly worded letter from Congress. Lindsey Graham says, I don't know all the details regarding President Trump's decision in northern Syria and process of setting up phone call with Secretary Pompeo. I can't reach him because he's too busy lawyering up. If press reports are accurate, this is a disaster in the making. So Lindsey's backing this 100%. Ensures ISIS comeback, forces Kurds to align with Assad and Iran, destroys Turkey's relationship with the U.S. Congress, will be a stain on America's honor for abandoning the Kurds.
Meh. Who cares?
Maybe Congress can pass a measure renaming the Kurds Armenians.
Oh, will that make any difference to Trump or someone else?
Well, Turkey likes that.
Does Turkey like them, or does Turkey like...
Turkey likes massacring Armenians,
Oh, well,
except they really get mad at you when you tell them about that.
That's true. But they don't need to have it renamed. They're just as happy to massacre Kurds.
Well, maybe they'll rename the Armenians Kurds, and then Turkey will be happy to talk about their history.
Oh, maybe. I don't know. I do notice, I guess Trump is tweeting about things this morning, giving his side of the story. I don't care what it is, but I am noticing responses to it. There's plenty of response to it from people tweeting, allegedly anyway, from Turkey, and I believe some of them because they appear to be tweeting in Turkish, although honestly, if you just pounded on the keyboard, I wouldn't be able to tell the difference. But I hit the translate this tweet button, and it translates, so it must really be Turkish. Random Turkish tweeters are happy about it. They think it's fantastic.
They love them, right?
They think it's a
who
great
else would
decision.
be randomly tweeting Trump,
Right?
Except for random Turks who actually like him?
Yes, of some concern. As the American response is mixed. Some, finally the right decision, actually, and others who say this is a huge mistake. There are some military types or, military supporters who have been taught, I think, correctly, that abandoning allies is a bad idea.
We're going to analyze this from the point of view of experts and not random people on Twitter.
Oh. Well, I just wanted to let you know that there are some people, the Turks are tweeting.
There are random people on Twitter, I do accept
The Turks are tweeting, finally, time for revenge. So that sounds ominous.
Like I was saying. So Lindsey Graham finishes up by saying, if this plan goes forward, we'll introduce a Senate resolution opposing and asking for reversal of the decision. I don't know how you reverse it after you're dead. But, that's a good thought, Lindsey. Expect it will receive strong bipartisan support. So, in effect, he's proposing that Congress issue the equivalent of a sternly worded letter with no teeth and after the fact and too late. So I suggested to him maybe he should reconsider impeachment. Maybe that would be a better thing to do.
Or golf. Go golfing.
Well, that's
and
the
see
funny
if it
thing.
helps
He's golfing with Trump, so he gets to keep influence. That's the whole point. And, it's really working,
Well, he didn't go this weekend, so...
Well, Trump didn't even tell him about it. He called into Fox Inference this morning as well, trying to change Trump's mind, because obviously he doesn't have a direct line to Trump.
Right.
So I have to do
Trump,
something
if you're
about
listening.
this. Did I pick up the phone and call the president? No. Did I pick up the phone and call Pompeo? No, I can't reach him. He's lawyering up. Right. So I'll do the best way to get to Trump and try to influence him. I will call Fox News and talk there about it.
Right. I can't think of a better way unless it's printed on the back of an ice cream carton.
Dave Rothkopf, foreign policy expert, says, and UConn graduate, says this is a stunning rebuke, that Brent McGurk thread that I read to you, of the president by one of his former envoys. I don't recall a more trenchant one in my lifetime. It's also the most important thread you will read on Trump's unconscionable betrayal of the Kurds today. So that's how the foreign policy experts are looking at it. Just thought I would mention that.
Okay. More random people. That's what we need to read.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, well, we won't.
And, of course, that's not the only thing that's going on. It happens to be the most recent thing that's going on.
Yes. Well, that's
Meanwhile, between the time that I was on the air Thursday, the time you were on the air Friday, and now, lots more whistleblower Ukraine scandal stories.
Yes. Mostly people saying I was right on Friday. So that's good news. Except it's also bad for America.
Last
I forgot
night,
that part. Yeah.
Just about the time. I think this was even before Trump sent out, I'm going to betray the Kurds information. This was from, of all people, AP. I didn't expect this. But this is updated this morning. Profit, not politics, what some Trump allies did in Ukraine. It turns out, and this is going to shock you, as Rudy Giuliani was pushing Ukrainian officials last spring to investigate one of Donald Trump's main political rivals, who will go unnamed at the moment because that's not important to the story, a group of individuals with ties to the president and his personal lawyer, that would be Rudy, were also active in the former Soviet Republic. Their aims were profit, not politics.
Profit.
A circle of businessmen and Republican donors touted connections to Giuliani and Trump while trying to install new management at the top of Ukraine's massive state gas company. Their plan was to then steer lucrative contracts to companies controlled by Trump allies, according to two people with knowledge of their plans. But the plan hit a snag after Ukrainian President Poroshenko lost his re-election bid. Lost his re-election bid. They were trying to use the corrupt previous president. He lost, and so they had to put a plan into action.
Right.
So what did they do? They worked real hard to get rid of the Ukrainian ambassador.
Yes.
Who would have blocked this stuff, and they enlisted Energy Secretary Rick Perry.
He's smart.
Who slated candidates for this new president and the new board of the gas company, included a fellow Texan who's one of Perry's past political donors.
Fun. He's probably in Ukraine all the time.
The affair shows how those with ties to Trump and his administration were pursuing business deals in Ukraine that went far beyond advancing the president's personal political interests. So if you want to, give an abbreviated roundup here, it turns out that Rudy and his pals, his crony capitalists, were doing everything they've ever accused Hunter Biden of doing.
Yes. Pretty much, and that's usually a good bet, and a lot of people will remind us, I'm sure, that they threw that out there. The first thing, their first reaction to the Hunter Biden angle was, well, this must be projection of some sort, and it is.
And of course, when on Friday, Trump told a group of Republican lawmakers that he didn't want to be impeached, but he also told them that Rick Perry was the one who prompted the phone call, and we all laughed at that.
Yeah.
It turned out Perry did prompt the phone call.
He may very well
Perry had asked Trump to make the call to discuss something about liquefied natural gas, said Trump. Now, Perry didn't tell Trump to go ahead and extort the president there. But there's a whole bunch of stuff missing from that call.
Yeah, I guess it's all about gas.
Yeah, what if it were about the corrupt, I fired the ambassador so she wouldn't get in the way. Right. How about coming through and helping my buddies here?
Yeah, that'd be amazing that'd be amazing to edit that out. I wonder if he thought, oh, they're accusing me of a quid pro quo. I will edit out all of the quid pro quo stuff. And because he doesn't, for whatever reason, he doesn't regard the actual quid pro quo that we all read about that unnamed politician as a quid pro quo, and I guess he recognizes that the other one is. So now, no quid pro quo, I deleted it, is what he meant.
Right. Now, AP spoke to four people with direct knowledge, not hearsay, of the attempts to influence Naftogaz, Naftogaz.
Yes.
And their accounts show Perry playing a key role in the effort. Three of the four spoke on condition of anonymity for fear of retaliation. The fourth is an American businessman with close ties to the Ukrainian energy sector. Now,
that's not Carter Page, is
if you step back and look at all of this, I mean, just there's so much to unpack here. Besides the deep corruption using the energy department, so you add yet another corrupt department of federal bureaucracy that Trump is utilizing to help enrich his friends. And remember, Rick Perry is retiring.
Retiring.
Everybody at the time said, gee, here's the one guy who escaped without scandal.
Yeah.
Do you remember that?
I do, and I'm not sure
he kept
whether
his head down, and he's a good guy, and he just tried his best, and he's the one person who hasn't been tainted by everything Trump touches dies. Well, Governor.
Womp womp.
Womp womp indeed.
Yeah. I wasn't sure whether he was whether he announced his retirement. I noticed it, I guess, at the time, where I was like, is he retiring to get out of there with a clean record, or does he know what's coming and he's retiring? But I don't remember when he announced this thing. Anyway, doesn't matter. He's a Trump cabinet member, so he's corrupt, and we'll find out about eventually.
All right. So one of these folks told AP, and I quote, Trump planned to remove the U.S. ambassador Maria Yovanovitch, who, by the way, is testifying to Congress on Friday, and replace her with someone more open to siding with their business interests. So that's a pretty devastating article there, and from AP of all of all people.
AP, and I'm just
Remember,
amazed
AP
that
people
Ps
accuse
are
the
able
AP
to write
of being
like this.
stenographers. Not
Yeah.
the case.
All right. Well, that's a good one. But yes, it all turns out to have been, largely what we started speculating on in the, I don't know, was it the middle of last week, maybe even the end of the previous week, that the story in Ukraine might turn out to be that the Ukrainian American businessmen, Lev Parnas and Igor Fruman, who've been feeding all this information to Giuliani, they have magically decided to start a gas company operating in Ukraine. And I think that there's a pretty good possibility that the real story might be, well, we could be really successful selling natural gas in Ukraine if everyone else who sells natural gas in Ukraine got arrested. Then we could corner the market. And they set about the task of making sure that those people got arrested at the request of the Trump administration.
Well, the Ukraine issue in a nutshell is that the previous administration there, of course, was well known around the world for being incredibly corrupt. It's part of what Joe Biden was trying to clean up. So the old guard goes, the new regime comes in, and Trump says, we have to support American interests. Why don't we get everybody trying to actually do reform, like our ambassadors, fired?
Yeah.
So that the corruption can go back to the way it used to be, except that our people will be in place to take advantage of it. That's what's happening here. And it's astounding. It's just as astounding as, but obviously less dangerous with less human life involved than slaughtering the Kurds.
Yes, that's a more direct action. Well, this will be an interesting week, an interesting start to the week as allies fall away.
What that week's going to mean, because Congress is actually doing stuff about this, not Lindsey Graham style, but Nancy Pelosi style. This is an article from WSB TV in Atlanta, who happens to be covering this usefully from the Cox Media Group. Impeachment inquiry. Who is testifying before Congress this week? You need a list. You got to have a program. You can't tell the players without a scorecard. So here it is. The former ambassador to Ukraine, a State Department counselor, the U.S. ambassador to the European Union. That's the guy who is Trump's bagman, who is really trying to insinuate himself into everything and run things for the benefit of both Trump's reelection and graft and corruption.
Yep.
And a deputy secretary of state are all scheduled to appear in private before committees assigned to lead the impeachment inquiry against Trump. The inquiry, which was announced by House Speaker Nancy Pelosi on September 24th, it hasn't even been a month yet, was launched after a whistleblower contacted members of Congress with concerns about a phone call Trump made in July to the president of Ukraine, apparently at the behest of Rick Perry, but Trump, of course, did whatever Trump does. The phone call, according to Trump critics, had the president leveraging his power to hold $400 million in aid to Ukraine in exchange for information on former Vice President Joe Biden and his son Hunter Biden. Oh, you know what? The Kurds probably didn't have enough information on Hunter Biden and Joe Biden, and therefore Trump decided to withdraw all of the aid there. Trump says the call congratulating Vladimir Zelensky on becoming president of Ukraine was perfect and has been misinterpreted. Scheduled to testify before House committees this week are George Kent, Deputy Secretary of State. Kent is scheduled to testify today. Kent oversees policy toward Ukraine in his State Department job, and he was Deputy Chief of Mission at the U.S. Embassy in Kiev from 2015 to 2018. Part of his job was to form anti-corruption policy in the region before 2015, so he's knowledgeable. Gordon Sondland, he's the bagman, the U.S. ambassador to the European Union. Remember, Ukraine is not in the European Union, and technically speaking, Sondland has no authority or reason to be anywhere near Ukraine, except his authority stems from, quote, the president, end quote, which is what he told everybody when he was bigfooting and throwing his weight around.
Yeah.
Sondland is expected to testify on Tuesday. That would be tomorrow. According to the whistleblower's complaint, Sondland, along with Kurt Volker, offered advice to the Ukrainian leadership about how to navigate the demands that the president had made of Mr. Zelensky. Sondland and Volker also met with Giuliani, the whistleblower complaint said, to attempt to contain the damage to U.S. national security that Giuliani's effort to find information on Biden was having. Then there's Ulrich Breckbull, a State Department counselor. Breckbull is also scheduled to testify tomorrow. according to the whistleblower complaint. Breckbull was on the July 25th phone call. And then Masha Yovanovitch, former ambassador to Ukraine, Yovanovitch, who was recalled from her post after her loyalty to Trump was questioned by some of her supporters, is set to testify on Friday. So that's the ambassador that they wanted fired because she was interfering with their business plans.
Yes.
So that's all this week. And so information will be collected. I expect Jim Jordan to come out with each one of these meetings saying, well, obviously everything that happened supported the president, because who are you going to believe, me or your lying eyes?
Right.
We should just mention before the break, the Sunday show's Chuck Todd actually did a very good job with Ron Johnson, who is possibly the stupidest senator in the Congress, in the Senate. And that leaves out dumb people in the House, but boy, was he terrible. And basically went off on conspiracy theories, and Todd just had to bring him to earth and say, you're not answering the question, and, do you trust the CIA and the FBI? And he said, no.
Yeah, well, I don't really exactly trust them either, but for different reasons.
And Todd said to him, you're bringing
ways.
up everything that's basically a 4chan 8chan conspiracy.
Yes.
Do you really believe this?
No,
and apparently he wouldn't say.
Yeah, well, he does. He didn't realize where it came from, and he said, that sounds like a dumb place, 4chan. I think I'm supposed to be against that. And yet, this is the theory I'm going with. So what do I say?
He looked awful, and even Chuck Todd had enough. So it was actually, if you had the opportunity to look at that interview, it was actually pretty interesting.
I got the opportunity to look at the clip that circulated on Twitter of him yelling over Johnson and then telling him he was, a dope.
Pretty much.
That was good. That was enough for me. Anyway, we'll take our break for the next 2 minutes or so, regroup, think about what comes up next. Trump Towers Istanbul exists. I thought I would let you know. I could give you a short update on what the hell that is.
Where to stay.
It's a real place. So
Virginia, Poland coming after the break.
Okay, terrific. Hi, everybody. It's me, David. Let's change things up from the old fundraising pitch for just a minute and talk instead about how you can be a part of our show. If you've got a smartphone or any other electronic recording device, why not sit down and record a segment for us? Read us an important article and give us your take. Read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Then send the file to me at kagrox@gmail.com, and I'll try and work it into the show. Short segments, a few minutes in length, are easiest to fit in. And of course, I can't always guarantee that I'll be able to play everything, but if you've ever shouted at your radio or TV about something you wish was being covered, here's your chance to change that. Make the show your own. Send your submissions to me at kagrox@gmail.com. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio, and we're back from our break. And if our breaks are turned back on, and I hope that they are, I hope we fixed that issue. But we watch our language for the most part during the break, so no, it won't get us in any trouble. Also, we're not on the radio, so that's not going to be an issue. But I'm told we have some other things to cover here besides the abandonment of the Kurds to genocide.
Well, yeah, Trump's abandoned the Kurds internationally, and of course he's abandoned America more nationally, and
yes.
This stuff. So let's talk local.
All right.
There's a new poll out from Christopher Newport University, Wason Center. Rachel Bidikoff is the pollster, and it's about the upcoming in a month. Everybody vote. Virginia elections. Remember, Virginia does off season, so to speak.
Off year, yeah. It's still
elections.
a year. It's just off of the other year.
Right. So voters strongly favor Democrats in Assembly election. Trump trails any 2020 Democrat. Wason poll shows entering the final month of a pivotal state legislative election, Virginia Democrats' fortunes are looking up. With all 100 House of Delegates seats and all 40 state Senate seats on the ballot, Republicans' long-standing but narrow control of the General Assembly is at stake in the November 5th election. In the last election, Democrats cut their two-thirds majority significantly and barely
yes, I would say so.
Didn't take the houses. But this time, Democratic voters are more enthusiastic, 62 to 49. I'll have some caveats after this. More Democratic voters say they will definitely vote than Republican voters, 84 to 74. Likely voters generally prefer Democrats to Republicans by a 13-point margin, 49-36. And asked which party they prefer to have control of the assembly, voters strongly prefer Democrats over Republicans, 53-37, including 17-point margin among independent voters. With a month to go, that's actually very, very strong. So key findings. Ralph Northam's approval is at 51%.
Ralph. Yeah. She's Ralph. See, I told you. Ralph Northam is knocking on their door right now.
Yep.
Hello.
And voters are fairly optimistic about the state of the Commonwealth, but voters are pessimistic about the state of the country, with 62% of voters reporting the country is on the wrong track. President Trump's approval is at 37% in our 2020 ballot test. He trails a generic Democrat 51 to 36.
Okay. Good.
And this data largely predates the Ukraine disclosures.
Oh, right.
So only 6% of voters say they read the Mueller report. So again,
what percentage?
6.
6?
6. So, the idea that Ukraine is easier to wrap your mind around than what happened with Mueller is borne out by this. Now, issues with the poll, there's a lot of college-educated people in this poll, a huge proportion. I know Virginia isn't the Midwest, but they didn't seem to wait for education, and we learned in 2016 maybe that's a good idea. So take the poll with a grain of salt, but as I was talking about with some folks on Twitter, some dishes really taste delicious with a grain of salt. So it doesn't mean that it's wrong.
Yeah.
The margins may be a little bit off, but the trend is pretty clear. And people on the ground working for Democrats said, we're in a position to really give them a spanking in November. And, the poll actual margins might be wrong, but the trend is right. This is what's going on the ground. There's a lot of a disillusion on the Republican side. So we'll see what happens.
That's the solution for everything. We'll see what happens. This report brought to you by the Salt Association of America. Take it with a grain of salt.
And also Christopher Newport University.
Yes, all right, them. And you can and we are highly educated here in Virginia. We have a lot of these universities. The whole state is covered with them, as it turns out.
Right. So, again, it's all good, and I just thought I would mention that because you need some good news to come in with all the bad news that we're getting from the Trump administration. I think Trump is on his way to getting impeached. I don't know how many articles of impeachment there will be, but certainly abuse of power is going to be on the list. I don't know how much damage he's going to do between now and then, but, all things come to an end.
Yes, I hope so. Although I have seen an uptick in the number of panicked articles covering the topic of what if he doesn't leave, for whether as impeached or at the end of his term or anything.
Well, those are all legitimate questions now, given who he is and what he does.
Right.
But on the other hand, a lot of those articles are also about, White House in panic, White House paralyzed, White House doesn't know what to do, White House doesn't see this coming, White House doesn't have a plan, White House in chaos, we knew that. So, a lot of it is trying to figure out from the people who use their sources to try to put these stories together. They really don't know what to write. For example, we mentioned Rick Perry in the first segment of the show getting sucked into this. And tangentially, we happen to note that Pompeo, Secretary Pompeo of Secretary of State, is right in the middle of all of this and really doesn't have any good answers either. He's telling his diplomats not to talk to Congress, but as I read to you, there's a bunch of diplomats from state that are talking to Congress. And so that's not going over well. Mitt Romney said that things were terrible and what Trump was doing was abhorrent. And Trump started screaming at him. And after that, Susan Collins said what Trump did on the call was terrible. And obviously it has her worried. That's about as far as Susan Collins go. And yes, I know everybody always writes and says, well, Romney, what's he going to do? And what's Collins? What are they going to do? Any cracks whatsoever are freaking Trump out because he's trying to tell people there can be no dissidence here. You cannot even say, as they did in the late 90s with the Clinton impeachment, You can't say, well, I don't approve of what he did, but what he did isn't impeachable, because that implies you don't approve what Trump did, and Trump cannot have that.
He won't even accept
So
that
he's
part.
taking that particular line of reasoning away from them, so it's yet another different defense that's falling by the wayside. Because if you say, well, I didn't approve of what he did, but clearly it's not impeachable, he screams at you.
Yeah, well, he screams at everybody.
He screams at everybody. But I'm just saying that as the Republicans try to, Ron Johnson style, get their story together and try to come up with some cohesive response to all of this, they look terrible, because every single time they try to do something, he pulls the rug out from under it. For example, early Sunday, one of the lines that Marco Rubio had used earlier and Jim Jordan adopted, and Jordan looked pretty bad too, on George Stephanopoulos, was the idea that, listen, Trump didn't really ask China to investigate the Bidens. He was just joking.
Yes, right. One of his favorites.
Right after they were on TV saying that, Trump tweets, of course I asked China to investigate them.
Why
They're so
you
corrupt,
do
you have
this?
to. How could you not? And so it's just an example of every single time they try to defend him, they can't.
Yes.
And so they have taken the approach of, let's not say anything, but, when they come back from recess, that's not going to last. None of the defenses that they're using are sustainable. In fact, over the weekend, which is, I think, a first I read somewhere. I don't keep track of these things. But apparently they tried to get somebody from the White House on the Sunday shows, and everybody refused. They couldn't even get Stephen Miller.
Right, that was kind of big news. They didn't get. I don't think they had any of the Republican leadership on the shows either, and I guess it's just.
Well, doesn't Ron
ducking
Johnson count as leadership?
Well, he's a member of the Senate.
He's a senior member
Is
of an
he?
important committee.
Oh, well, all senators are. There's only 100 of them.
They all think they should be president, so they're all
Yes.
important. So I'm just saying, But yeah, he couldn't get Mitch McConnell on, and he couldn't get Kevin McCarthy on, because McCarthy had done so poorly when he was on 60 Minutes. They don't want him on.
Oh, okay.
And, you've got this problem that, people don't watch. They don't pay attention. Only 6% in Virginia read the Mueller report, and that's the college-educated sample.
It was long.
But as we talked about on the show some weeks ago, the political science literature says that if you keep repeating headlines in various and sundry media, then the story ultimately sinks in, even if you never click on the headlines, or even if you never listen, or even if you're just reading the sound turned down chyron on the CNN, Fox News airport monitors.
Right.
If you keep repeating the same story over and over on different media, the public gets it.
Okay, let's do
And
that.
we can see that because, the impeachment desire has gone up. As a matter of fact, one of the things I had, and this is from Axios, I think, put this together, on the Pundit Roundup, I have this graph that they kindly did, which overlays the Nixon impeachment sentiment with the Trump impeachment sentiment. Mm-hmm. And when the inquiry first started, 38% wanted Nixon impeached and removed. And now it's 44% for Trump. So Trump is starting ahead of where Nixon was at the same point in time.
I see.
Now, yes, I understand it's a different environment. We used to have only 3 networks and yada, yada. Fact of the matter is that there is some strong sentiment to impeach Trump, which now, 538 is actually doing an aggregate now. And if you put all the polls together, impeachment leads by about a point, which is pretty good considering where we are in that process. We're process people, and it's very early, as you say. And if you keep seeing impeachment numbers, impeachment polls, impeachment this, impeachment that, impeachment, it gets actually sunk into the public that, hey, I guess Congress is talking about impeachment. I know I'm not paying attention, but at least I know that.
Yeah, I guess that is something.
And that means that when impeachment stuff actually happens, televised hearings and stuff like that, people will be paying attention.
Okay.
We already know that they're paying way more attention to the 2020 election now than they did in 2016, right before the election. So, that Virginia poll may not be the outlier that the people say it might be.
I hope not. And, we'll find something out about it, I guess the first part of it. in
Very soon.
November.
Okay.
See how accurate
now,
things are.
Sean Trendy has a amusing comment. He says, it'll be sort of peak Trump if he ends up losing to Elizabeth Warren because he tried to kneecap somebody who was unlikely to be his opponent in the first place.
That would be pretty good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And he's a center right analyst, basically a neutral kind of guy, but I think it was kind of funny. The Washington Post is doing their out on a limb inside the Republican reckoning over Trump's possible impeachment. This is all from the pundit roundup. And even as polling shows an uptick in support nationally for Trump's impeachment, his command over the Republican base is uncontested. We don't care.
Yeah, right. We can't do anything about that one.
Representing a stark warning to any official who dares to cross him. It feels like we're constantly moving the line, said Tom Rath, a GOP fixture in New Hampshire. We say, don't cross this line. Okay, you crossed it, so don't cross this line. Lindsey Graham with the Kurds, right? We're finally at a point where patience is exhausted, reason is exhausted, and quite frankly, the voters are exhausted. A Republican strategist who was close with several senators and spoke on the condition of anonymity to share a candid assessment called the situation a disaster. This consultant has been advising clients to say as little as possible.
I see.
To buy time.
Okay. Yeah, well, I guess that would be my advice. Not knowing anything about Republican strategy, it's still probably a good default. Don't say anything.
Right. Ron Fournier retweeted this one. This is from the Washington Post. I helped classify calls for two presidents. Moving a call to the code word server can be justified only by national security concerns. And the pull quote is, it's difficult to overstate just how abnormal and suspicious treating the call in that manner would be. That's the Ukraine call that was moved over to the code word server. It strongly suggests White House staff knew of serious wrongdoing by the president and attempted to bury it. So people are involved. It's a pretty big scandal. He's obviously using a lot of different departments in support of corrupt things like in Ukraine. And so for all those people who said, I don't want you to just do Ukraine, I want a wider thing that includes everything. I said this to you before, David. Ukraine includes everything.
It does. And it's a good entree into everything. So, all right. Well, it'll be interesting.
But it's understandable.
Yes. Well, all of it is understandable. It was struck me when you were saying only 6% of people who read the Mueller report, which is not the same thing as saying, do you understand what's in the Mueller report? There are plenty of people who understand what's in there without having read it.
Yeah, but remember the mantra, read the report, read the report. People aren't going to read the report.
That's true.
Tell us what's in the frickin' report, okay?
Yeah, that
and
might
so
be wise.
Because people didn't read it, you get Rich Lowry on Meet the Press being able to say, well, Mueller report didn't do it. This is just more than Mueller report. And, of course, the Mueller report completely cleared him, and nobody challenges that. Because nobody's read the Mueller report. But that's, of course, not what the Mueller report said.
Yeah, I mean...
And that's where Bill Barr was a traitor to America and did everybody a disservice.
Yes, too bad about that. And, certainly should have, could have, still can be more pushback on that, and I guess people consider it old news now, and so therefore
you can just throw it in. Oh yeah, well everybody knows Ukraine and Russia are the same story. Let's talk about Ukraine.
Okay, yeah, right. Why not? That's not a bad approach to it at all. Who's going to challenge it? No. They're totally separate. Well, all right. If you want to talk about it, I'll prove you wrong. You'll be embarrassed, or you could just let it go.
Meanwhile, Treasury Inspector General is going to review handling of Trump's tax returns because there's a whistleblower there. So remember, the inspectors general do tend to be semi-autonomous, and stuff comes out from them. That's not just burying everything. They are not William Barr. It's not the Justice Department. And look what happened with the whistleblower that went to the IG for the intelligence community. Right?
Yes.
Now, Jim Sciutto points out that there was and actually this came from Oliver Darcy because I never would have read it on my own. Tucker Carlson and Neil Patel have an op-ed in the Daily Caller, which says exactly the stuff that we were talking about before. Trump should not have been on the phone with a foreign head of state encouraging another country to investigate his political opponent, Joe Biden. Some Republicans are trying, but there's no way to spin this. That's from Tucker Carlson.
Oh.
Then goes on to say, on the other hand, it doesn't rise to the level of impeachment. That's not up for him to say.
Right. It's not, and he's also wrong.
But the first part of it is significant. We're talking about Tucker Carlson, Evening Fox.
Yes,
this is Fox and Friends level people saying, you know what, even we can't defend this.
Yeah, Fox and Friends this morning was upset about Turkey and the Kurds. So
Well, that's because Lindsey Graham called in.
yes, well, I think they probably. I got some indication that they would have gotten that. They've spent so much time. They were well practiced during the Obama administration, insisting that Obama was constantly abandoning allies. They already have that script written. They just had to switch the names, which is a big deal for them to do. But I think they may also anticipate Trump simply changing his mind again later on today.
Right.
I'm not doing that. Forget it.
So Jim Jordan was going with, look, there's nothing incriminating that we heard from Congress about what's going on with Ukraine. And George Stephanopoulos read him the incriminating text messages.
You're adding words.
Basically stating that Trump was trying to trade arms for dirt, as some of the Republican messaging people put it. This isn't arms for hostages with Iran-Contra. This is arms for dirt. So they read the text, and Jordan's defense was, look, who are you going to believe, these texts or Trump? Everybody knows Trump is the greatest thing for America and stuff like that. Who are you going to believe, Trump or your lying eyes?
Yeah.
So Stuart Stevens writes in and says, well, his campaign manager is a felon. His deputy campaign manager is a felon. His NSA is a felon. His foreign policy advisor is a felon. His longtime personal lawyer is a felon. But the defense is he cares about corruption.
Right. He does. It's all around him. He cares.
Yeah.
It's in his daily life.
And then we had the AP story, which shows that it's the opposite of that.
Yes.
All right. Now, a federal judge orders the White House to preserve records of Trump dealings with foreign leaders. Notable because she could have just accepted the DOJ pledge that White House would, and also because an injunction applied to the president is exceptionally rare.
All right. Where did this come in? I didn't see this.
This comes in, so let me give you that. There's a Politico story about that. Judge orders White House to preserve records of Trump's dealings. So they got an injunction, basically, preserve all your records, don't destroy it. And the White House said, sure, we'll do that.
Sure, yeah.
And they said, no, actually, we're going to go to court and have that done.
Okay. Well, they don't have good records on that. Any White House, honestly. I think one of the prosecutors that Barr is bringing along with him to run this Ukraine scheme. Yes, one of Dunham's assistants.
Who's from Connecticut.
One of Dunham's assistants is the person who got tasked.
Because Connecticut is the center of the universe. That's
yes.
why.
Well, some people think so. But I saw over the weekend one of his Dunham's assistants. Their backgrounds are pretty solid in terms of nonpartisanship of their assignments in the past. Anyway,
right.
Back in the old days when departments kind of worked that way. But one of the assistants had a previous job of investigating the CIA when they had been ordered to preserve, but instead destroyed the tapes of the torture sessions. So, we do have a problem with executive departments saying, sure, we'll preserve evidence, and then just saying, actually, we won't, because we think you can't indict a sitting president and everyone will get pardoned.
Right. Something I think just breaking October 7th, 9:15 a.m.
That's today.
Trump ordered to comply with state subpoena of his tax returns.
Yes, I saw that for a while.
New York federal judge blocked an
Just
attempt from President Donald Trump to halt a subpoena issued by the Manhattan DA for 8 years of his tax returns. That's Cy Vance, who I don't necessarily trust, but there we go.
Right.
The Manhattan federal judge also tried to place Trump's argument in historical context, noting the framers shunned the concept of the inviolability of the person of the King of England and the bounds of the monarch's protective screen covering the crown's actions from legal scrutiny. So, where's Arlen Specter when you need him?
He has died.
Didn't really. No low contendere.
Yeah. Right. I also see, by the way, who's tweeting this story? Is it? A couple people remarking on this. I guess that the judge who has issued this ruling was born in Puerto Rico and filled Sonia Sotomayor's slot on the bench. So Will Bunch says, I'm sure the president will react calmly and rationally to this ruling. So that should be fun. I assume he'll blow his stack some point, probably just before they feed him lunch.
Right. Pawn All the Things, who follows things for lawfare, says this will probably get a lot of coverage today, this injunction.
Yes. Oh, I would think so.
Oh, no. This tax return thing.
Oh, okay. Yeah, all right.
Took a huge swing at the Department of Justice memos that say sitting president can't be indicted, and that'll get coverage too, but that's not saying it a lot because the Office of Legal Counsel memos are not binding on a court. They are binding on the executive branch.
Yes.
So if OLC says the president can't be indicted, that's binding on the Justice Department.
Right. Yeah, and they're
not
the ones
the
who
courts,
do the
not anybody else. Everybody can sue, but don't expect the Department of Justice to sue on your behalf.
Right.
That's not going to happen.
All right. Well, a lot of process to work out there, but
Right.
it is worth remembering that not everybody believes that OLC memo got it right.
Right. Okay, so what else is happening? Global economy has entered a second and more dangerous phase of slowing, says J.P. Morgan. And a new Fox poll out of Wisconsin, Trump won rural voters by 27 points in 2016. They back him over Biden by 2 points now. In fact, Fox News poll has Trump underwater with non-college voters -3 and independents -19 in Wisconsin. If he loses Wisconsin, he's not winning the presidency. I just thought I would mention that. So that's pretty much a summary of what's going on this Monday morning. There's a lot, and I always try to catch up on Mondays just to let you know all the stuff that happened over the weekend because we get the Friday night news dumps, and then things don't stop. They just keep dumping.
Yes. Well, Trump never stops dumping, I guess.
Right?
There you have it. I don't know,
this
or
is
maybe
kinda
he never
interesting.
starts.
Civics
That could be the problem. Yeah.
is following one of the many people who's following the impeachment information, and they've had for civics polls are interesting. They're online polls, and you basically can most of the time draw them with a ruler. They just don't vary.
Okay.
Okay.
Are they doing them, or they're just?
Well, right
telling us
after
the
the
same
Mueller
answer?
testimony, for example, 48% oppose impeachment, 45% support. Once Pelosi announced impeachment, that switched. Okay. And it went to 48 support, 47 oppose. And today, it's 50% support, 45 oppose.
Awesome.
And if you look at the graph, I just sent you the link at the very end there in the last in the last week or so, in the last month, since September 10th to October 5th, September 26th through October 5th. Sorry, just in the last couple of weeks, it's really been a pretty marked change in a poll that generally doesn't move at all.
Okay. I wonder why nobody ever suggested that the leadership changing their opinion might influence where the public falls on this.
Well, that's what political scientists say happens.
Oh.
And so obviously a lot of all of a sudden the impeachment numbers are changing are from Democrats being brought along by leadership. Because don't forget, when you ask them, why don't you want to impeach?
Yeah.
Democrats say he deserves it, but I just don't want to do anything that's really bad for the party. I'm afraid that this might be bad for the House.
Yes.
And so if leadership says, no, actually, we're good with this, then a lot of those folks are brought along.
Yeah, I'll go
But
along
also
with
independents, and independent leaning, Democratic leaning independents, and some Republicans as well. And so that's important. If you look at his approval rating, that's also taken a hit. You can see it on civics, which doesn't move all that much, but it's now 42% approve, 55% disapprove, and at least there's enough of a visible change so that you could see what's going on there. And if, for example, you look at the 538 aggregate, it's changed as well. Trump's now in the low 40s, and just before the whole impeachment thing, he was up as high as 43. And it's interesting because it doesn't sound like a lot, but when you're talking about aggregate polling, collecting them all, there's a difference between the high 40s and the low 40s in terms of your reelection chances. And Trump is, pretty much putting himself in the low 40s. It'll be interesting because a lot of these aggregates are influenced by the fact that Rasmussen polls every day. Harris X, which is Scott Rasmussen's new shop, he left Rasmussen polling his old shop. I don't think of them as quality polls, either one, but they tend to poll frequently and therefore tend to dominate the aggregates. But when the high quality every once in a while, polls come out, NBC Wall Street Journal, ABC Washington Post, Pew, Quinnipiac, polls like that, Trump's numbers are significantly lower. So if he's mired at around 40, 41, if he's losing people in Wisconsin, if impeachment is in the news every day and sinks in, this is all good for America. That's all I'm saying.
Okay. I'm for things that are good for America. That's my slogan.
And that's my wrap for this Monday. That's as much news as I could fit in.
Okay. I think that's a large amount and probably a good amount. Why don't we accept it?
Okay.
I move that we accept it. Unanimously carries, I guess, and hearing no objection. Good. Okay. I guess you get to reclaim your time now and have your day.
Yeah, and then maybe when I'm back on Wednesday, we'll try to catch up with what's going on in Israel and what's going on with the United Kingdom. It's going to be interesting to see if all three of the populist leaders in those three countries get into a whole bunch of trouble.
Probably. There's plenty to be had.
Yeah, we talk about Boris Johnson and Bibi Netanyahu a lot. Of course, part of the problem for us with their elections and leadership struggles is that the opposition in both countries is pretty weak.
That's true. Also, they use such weird things to figure out who wins. But
I have to tell you, Boris Johnson seems to be in a spot of trouble.
Yes.
He may get a no confidence vote. People don't think he can deliver Brexit.
No.
And the no deal Brexit is awful for the country, and so they're talking about what comes after this, and they're talking about caretaker governments.
Oh.
And because Jeremy Corbyn is so unpopular, guess who they're talking about as the possible caretaker PM?
I don't know.
They're talking about John Bercow.
That would probably work. All right. So
and you folks know who he is.
Right. Well done. We would really be prepared. Only KITM listeners fully prepared for who would take over as caretaker governor there. Okay. Interesting. Thanks, Greg.
It would be fun. Take care, and I'll talk to you next week.
Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. All right, Greg, thanks for wrapping things up. We had an extra minute of conversation while we took our break, and it does sound pretty interesting. That would really be something to see John Bercow taking over. And he did himself a lot of favors being so flamboyant as speaker, and I guess got a lot of – I don't think he had that in mind by a long shot. I don't think anybody could have predicted that, but that would not be a bad outcome. Certainly we'll say this. No, I don't want to say dumber, but it is kind of dumb. But I mean, that's a broad judgment to impose on, let's say, the guy I was talking about, the new president of Ukraine. I was just going to say, no dumber than electing, for instance, a guy who got famous playing president of the country on TV as president of the country. As certainly no dumber than electing a guy who pretended to be a businessman as president of the United States on the premise that the United States needs a businessman as president. I mean, that was a dumb premise to begin with. But had you elected an actual businessman, it still would have been pretty dumb all by itself. But I guess the only thing dumber than all of those things combined would be to elect a president of the United States on the premise that we need a businessman in office and have him be a fake businessman whose only successful business, really and truly, was airing a program engineered to make him look like he was a capable and knowledgeable businessman when he was not. Maybe one of the most important things we've read on the air in the show was the discussion with the editors of the early seasons of The Apprentice. In fact, the pilots of The Apprentice, who made so clear to us that they thought they were editing a riotous send-up comedy, a spoof of what it is to be a businessman in America, when they were first filming and editing the first episodes of The Apprentice. And it was only when Mark Burnett came in and said, no, I'm serious. You need to go back and re-edit this piece from whatever footage we have to make it look like he's a hard-nosed, tough, hard-hitting businessman and makes executive decisions, like that, and that they're solid and make sense, and he's got business acumen. And it was difficult for those editors. They discussed that for a couple of things, saying that there was sometimes no footage available to them to backfill a justification for who he decided to fire, for instance. That all the footage indicated that the person that he decided to keep on had been a phenomenal failure and a cheat, and that the person that he chose to fire had performed with some integrity and actually tried to, withstand the backstabbing of others and make the best of it, and actually performed reasonably well under the circumstances, but got fired nonetheless. And there was sometimes just no way of justifying it, period. And I guess that's where we started to learn about the myth of Trump going with his gut and having this fantastic instinct that despite all evidence to the contrary, his gut, which rarely we lack for evidence of his gut, was telling him what to do, and that it all would bear out in the end, because look at me, I'm a billionaire, right? So that must mean something. And then, of course, later, once he was elected and we began to learn about where his billions came from, although many of us had an inkling of where his billions came from before his election, but collectively as a country, we only began to sit up and take notice of it. New York area people have known for a long time that he was kind of a fraud. And probably, I would guess, the college-educated among us who don't like him very much probably could even tell from The Apprentice that something was really wrong with his business sense. All right. We can move on to probably more organized topics of discussion here. What have we here? A couple of late-breaking stories forwarded here from Greg. What do we got here? Adam Klasfeld. Who is Adam? Adam is a reporter with Courthouse News covering the work of the Second Circuit here. The federal judge who, I guess, went with the order to turn over the taxes. As expected, Trump's attorneys have already filed an emergency appeal to the Second Circuit, the federal appeals court. Judge Marrero's ruling states Trump has requested a presidential shield from the judicial process that is virtually limitless. We'll share the ruling as soon as it uploads, although there is a screen grab or two here that I guess gives us some of the information. And I guess he just didn't want to do repeated screen grabs the whole thing. It is, after all, 75 pages, so they're waiting for the document to upload. But I guess this is the important part here. Hence, according to this categorical doctrine as presented in this proceeding, the constitutional dimensions of the presidential shield from judicial process are virtually limitless until the president leaves office by expiration of his term, resignation, or removal through impeachment and conviction. Nice of them to throw that in there. His exemption from criminal proceedings would extend not only to matters arising from performance of the president's duties and functions in his official capacity, but also to ones arising from his private affairs, financial transactions, and all other conduct undertaken by him as an ordinary citizen, both during and before his tenure in office. And, honestly, that pretty much failed a long time ago. And we found that presidents were, in fact, subject to judicial process while seated as president for private actions taken during the Clinton investigation and the subsequent impeachment. But all the people who argued for it then are busily arguing against it now. So luckily, there's no hypocrisy happening here. Ha ha. Okay. Let's see. Moving on here, we'll explore both Pocket and the Twitter feed just to catch up on things. I mentioned to you earlier in the program that we were getting some concurrence with my own earlier thoughts on what was likely underlying the work that the Trump administration, the cheating the Trump administration was doing in Ukraine. I didn't know about the Rick Perry angle before the weekend, but it was still relatively easy to understand, I thought. Understand the developments in Ukraine by looking at it as a ploy for Trump cronies, or in the cronies of Trump, the cronies of Trump cronies, the hangers-on, although most Trump direct cronies are hangers-on too. Pretty easy to see it as a profiteering scam. And I refer you here to, let's see, the discussion of things back on October 2nd, which is was that last Wednesday? I think so. And we were off the air on Wednesday, but I had left behind, of course, the recorded program that started to lay some of this stuff out, and I tweeted the conclusions out as well. This was actually a thread that was prompted by Trump's tweet of the Bidens having their picture taken with an executive from Burisma, the energy company in Ukraine that Trump and his people keep insisting was itself corrupt, and that may in fact be the case, but that anybody who had any connection with it, i.e. Hunter Biden in this case, sitting on their board, must also likewise be corrupt. That, of course, does not actually follow. But, of course, that tweet got taken down because Trump retweeted a meme that involved stolen footage from, was it a Nickelback video? Do I have that right? And so they invoked copyright protection and ended up getting the tweet taken down. But it was Trump saying, using the line, look at this photograph. And it was the picture of the Bidens and this Burisma executive, allegedly anyway. And I, started out by saying, we're sharing pictures. Here's a picture of Donald Trump and Giuliani with the two Ukrainian American fraudsters, essentially, Parnas and Fruman, who we had learned so much about during the Wednesday program last week. And one of their concerns, of course, being their new concern is allegedly a gas company. And there's even questions about that. So I had tweeted out, here's you and Giuliani and two executives, not just one, two executives from a competing Ukrainian gas company who just happened to be the guys pushing Giuliani to accuse the other competing gas company of corruption. Weird. So, right, we're laying it all out last Wednesday. Isn't that amazing? I asked Donald Trump himself via Twitter. The very same guys who told Giuliani that this other Ukrainian gas company was corrupt just started their own gas company that stands to make a killing if their competitors are investigated and if the war with Russia continues to disrupt supply of natural gas to Ukraine. Maybe the real story in Ukraine is that Giuliani's sources stand to make a killing in the natural gas market if their competition just happens to get arrested, whether it's BS or not. And if their BS happens to help Trump, well, great. They'll have access through the leveraging of the, illegal leveraging of the power of the American government, which is currently, for whatever stupid reason, in Trump's hands. They'll have access to even more U.S. gas to sell. And, that's kind of what's happening here. I said also, you don't have to trust me, right? You could look it up. What business are these? Yeah, well, it changed it to Moons. It was supposed to be Mooks. Lev Parnas and Igor Fruman. What business are they supposedly in today? They're in the business of trying to export natural gas to Ukraine. And, by the way, in the business of kicking back $500,000 of what they make to Trump super PACs and Republican candidates. So, that's pretty important. All right, let me connect that to what's happening this week with other people who've been thinking about the same subject, I happened to notice that, and I still have to keep clicking back here, that our previous a Twitter personality that we've read before, Susan Simpson, who tweets as The View from LL2. Remember, she loves to dig into this stuff and offer up her own opinions of what's happening. And let's see, I think I have to jump back a few days here, and she's connected a bunch of her own thinking and her own threads here. How far back do I have to go in order to get this? Because she, too, began to draw the same conclusion at about the same time, which I happened to notice, I think, on, I don't remember if it was the weekend or earlier, but she, too, on October 2nd, began to come to the same conclusion about what Parnas and Fruman were really up to. Let me see if I can scroll back to this, because I have her expansion on things, which is also very important, on October 5th. So that was Saturday work that she was doing that begins to incorporate the Rick Perry angle here. But let's see, I got to keep scrolling to find this thing. There we are. Back on Saturday when I saw her begin to expand on this work, I looked back where she started. I said, we're starting to converge on this, and that may mean something here. I had tweeted my thread on Wednesday, I don't know, about 5 o'clock, and about an hour later, she kind of hit on the same, or began tweeting something very similar. She had said, as a matter of fact, here's her tweet, and this got a chain with it too. I got to look that one up. I swear we are like 3 news cycles away, she said, on last Wednesday, 6 o'clock. We're 3 news cycles away from finding out this whole Ukraine thing was a scheme dreamed up by 2 petty grifters who thought if they could bring the president dirt on his opponent, Trump would reward them by ensuring they got a contract to export liquid natural gas to Ukraine. Well, as it turns out, that seems to have been borne out. Let me see if I can find the Twitter thread that goes with that as well. So let me see here. We got, I didn't book the whole thing here. This is The View from LL2 we're looking for. And let me see. I guess I'll put in the quote from that. I swear, right? What do we say? 3 news cycles. That seems like a good search term here. And here she's following up on it last night here. But she had originally said, I swear we're like 3 news cycles away. Today, or last night, 12 hours ago. She says, might have been a bit over 3 news cycles. They go so fast these days. But now I can take a look at that old thread. Where does she begin with this? Back on Wednesday, about the time that I was tweeting out my thoughts on this, she began with, I have no idea what's going on with the state IG story. Remember when he came to Congress and had that weird packet that had been strangely calligraphied and drawn up to look like it was a White House envelope? I have no idea what's going on with the state IG story or who sent that packet to Pompeo. But what I really want to know is how many envelopes they had to throw out before they finally got this address right. The one with the fancy calligraphy, Secretary Pompeo, attention Ruth. The urgency part is indeed baffling, but I'm confused about Raskin's dismissal of this packet as having nothing to do with Trump, because it seems like it has a lot to do with Giuliani's activities in Ukraine. This is where things began to click for me. Let's see. She now says tweets of the docs from the packet have now been deleted. Not sure why, but they showed emails between Giuliani's client, Lev Parnas, and the 2 attorneys who were working with Giuliani to get dirt on Biden. And, of course, we haven't discussed them much, but Victoria Tensing and Joseph DeGenova, who are longtime Republican operatives, usually when they're involved in something, it is conspiracy theory level, and they are looking to boost it into the mainstream media. That's their job, usually. Also mentioned here is Hill reporter John Solomon, who I think got name-checked by Greg when we were discussing this last week, too. And here attached is a Daily Beast article that says, frequent Fox guests, the tweet says frequent Fox guests, I got to get back to it. Oh, too many pop-ups. Hold on. Kill the pop-ups. Frequent Fox guests DeGeneva and Tensing reportedly teamed up something. But the actual, so I clicked through to see what the something is because the headline got cut off. But there we are. Finally got it. Trump-supporting lawyers DeGeneva and Tensing teamed up with Giuliani to dig up Ukraine dirt on Biden, according to a report. I guess we should probably review that at some point, but maybe I'll get through Susan Simpson's tweets first. Anyway, she follows that up. This is her train of thought here. It is not directly related to Trump in that it appears to be the efforts of a group with their own private agenda in Ukraine. That is the contents of the packet. But they're using their connections to the president to influence U.S. policy and have the State Department implement personnel changes that benefit them. You see, this is now becoming clear as the progenitor of her more comprehensive theories, which Greg mentioned earlier, that they were basically pulling off a coup of sorts, replacing the U.S. ambassador to Ukraine because she was clear on these guys being fraudsters, largely unqualified to do the work that they were hoping to do, and hoping to do it on the back of selling bad information to a desperate president as well. Parnas and Fruman of Global Energy Producers, LLC, are the clients that actually pay Giuliani for his Ukraine work. He says he's not getting paid by the president in this. The president is my client, and I'm going to... knocking down a few important pieces of equipment here. Pardon me while we clean that up. And I guess, well, here's the error message. That was the Seagate backup drive being knocked to the floor, so hopefully nothing terribly damaged there. Anyway, back to the story. Giuliani has claimed that though Trump is his client, Trump is not paying him, which is unusual considering the amount of globe-trotting he's been doing for this so-called client. But he's getting paid. Don't worry about that. It's just that he's getting paid indirectly and through other channels, which was an enormous problem for the other guy who got mixed up in Ukraine politics and ended up in prison for it, Paul Manafort. Oh, I'm working for Trump, but I'm unpaid. But a Ukrainian oligarch is paying me to work for Trump so long as I also send him, I guess, apparently, polling information. We should give that some thought, too, and revisit that arrangement and see if we can figure out why the hell that might have been going on and whether we can think of any reasonable connection to the gas sale. But I don't think so. It's just a different sector he was in, as I call aluminum, wasn't it? Anyway, but as we were saying here, it's not the idea was that the packet of information that the state IG had was being dismissed as not directly related to Trump. And she's saying it appears that it was generated by another group that intended to use it to, they were attempting to get into the natural gas market, and they were attempting to force their way in by buying influence with the American president. And they figured the only way to buy that influence was you could placate his conspiracy, his thirst for conspiracies about Ukraine, to which he was already negatively inclined, right? And it jived with prior existing conspiracy theories that it wasn't the Russians that meddled in the 2016 election, but the Ukrainians, and they were just offering him confirmation of that bias, but tailored in a way that would also achieve their own business ends. Parnas and Fruman, she says, of Global Energy Producers, LLC, are the clients that actually pay Giuliani for his Ukraine work. Since 2016, Global Energy has also donated millions of dollars of dubious origin to GOP campaigns. So they've been able to maximize Trump contacts through that. And the money is of dubious origin because Global Energy Producers LLC hasn't produced any energy. It doesn't, in fact, produce any energy, and it was never the plan for them to produce any energy. But they did have a profiteering plan. They just haven't executed any of it yet because they're not a real company. So where do they get the $500,000 to give away to Republicans? Big question mark. So Susan continues on here. The goal of Global Energy Producers, per their logo request summary, and that's not like a legally binding document when it comes to laying out your mission or your goal. This was literally, this is how nascent the company is. The only documentation we have about the company is their request for proposals looking for graphic designers to design a logo for them. They were that early stage of a company. And, you know, as is, I don't know, maybe you've never dealt with anything like this. But as you might imagine, I don't think this would catch anybody by surprise. If you were trying to have a logo designed for your company, a designer would ask you, what does your company do? What is your business? What is your approach, your philosophy? What sorts of things might I try to look into for inspiration for your logo? Otherwise, I would just give you a big, I don't know, what your natural gas, I don't know, a big canister. I don't know, a fracking well. I have no idea what you might visually represent a natural gas company with. The blue flame, though, from a stovetop, for instance, if you were a domestic provider of gas service, that sort of thing, right? You need to know, what do they do? So they told them, here's what we do. We use they use their domestic and international relationships to capitalize on opportunities around the world, which is like what any business, I guess, does. But the fact that they put that out there right away, that we use our domestic and international relationships, for us, bribery, but for legitimate businessmen in the United States, we leverage our power by donating money, yes. But what a non-committal thing. What do you do for a living? Well, I use domestic and international relationships to capitalize on opportunities. Really? So do I. And I'm not even in business. But okay. So yeah, that's the interest that the president's attorney is being paid to advance in Ukraine. And she includes here a screen cap of their project description of their looking for their logo. Global Energy Producers was founded by a group of business leaders representing several complementary industries. It's about as non-committal as it gets. Our goal is to capitalize on opportunities around the world by leveraging both domestic and international relationships. We are a United States-based company, the first actual asserted fact in the whole thing, transacting in LNG, liquid natural gas, oil and gas, and solar energy, amongst others. What do you think? Well, yeah, they have no contracts and they've done no work in any of them. But whatever you got, if I can make money on it, I work in that. I would like to use our logo, the writer of the document said, and have a black background. What a strategic vision that is. I would like to use our logo. Oh, really? You want to? Okay, that's great. Oh, and our background should be black. Okay. Would like to have several tabs, like, I guess this is more than just the logo. They're looking for their website to be built. Again, early stage company. So here's their strategic vision. These are globetrotters, by the way. They have insight into the inner workings of the government, both in the United States and Ukraine. And they know all about liquid natural gas and all kinds of other things, like business and stuff. And here's their insight for how they want their website to go. Would like to have several tabs, like About Us, Contact, Bios, which they give to an apostrophe S as well, Locations, etc. I want it where I can add all text in as easily as possible. Please feel free to privately message me for additional information, like what effing information, what's the name of your company, what the hell do you do? So these guys are amateurs at best. We'll continue with this because I think it's important after the break, but I could probably fit one or two more tweets in as soon as the music starts rolling. That's where she takes the break, though, and says, I swear we're like 3 news cycles away from finding out this whole Ukraine thing was a scheme dreamed up by 2 petty grifters, and who else would put out a project description like that, right? 2 petty grifters who thought they could bring the president dirt on his opponent, and Trump would then reward them by ensuring they got a contract to export liquid natural gas to Ukraine. We'll explain afterwards why exporting liquid natural gas to Ukraine isn't a natural winner and what they thought they had to do to make it one. Hi, it's me, David Waldman, your host for Kagro in the Morning, with a brand new interruption to say thanks to all of you who support the show. Remember when I told you that our average monthly donation was about $7, for which you were getting 2 great hours of news and entertainment 5 days a week, and how that came out to about 70 cents an hour? That's a pretty good deal, except it's wrong. The math actually works out closer to 17 cents an hour. It is hard to beat a deal like that, and even harder to send your kids to college on. Thankfully, Patreon.com makes it easy to make that work. Patreon, Patreon.com, is the simple, secure way to make recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Just search for me or the show name on the site, and they make it easy to crowdfund the show so that the power of our numbers can keep the show going for just a few bucks a month. Once again, thanks so much for all your support. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Roots Radio. Okay, just still trying to catch up here. Let's continue on with Susan Simpson's tweet stream here and see if we can bring things up to speed and then back it up with some published material. But she continues on here after saying, I swear we're like 3 news cycles away from finding out this whole thing was a scheme dreamed up by grifters to get contracts for liquid natural gas exports. I'm not even kidding. How many times before the whistleblower complaint came out, even, do you think Trump brought up LNG pipelines, liquid natural gas pipelines, and Ukraine in the same breath? That's not something a lot of people have checked into. The answer is pretty much every single time Trump mentioned Ukraine. And she has 4 screen caps here along with, I guess, some video and the text that is alleged to be in that video. First one here is, I guess, a transcript of Trump. We'll have to do it in the Trump voice. Well, I think we've done a lot of sanctioning of Russia. I brought up the pipeline. I'm helping Ukraine far more than President Obama did. We're doing a lot of sanctions on Russia. I signed a lot of sanctions on Russia. You know, eventually, we want to be able to get along with countries, too. We have to remember that, whether it's Russia or China or anybody else. Next up, I believe that Russia would rather have Hillary Clinton as president of the United States than Donald Trump. The reason is, nobody has been tougher on Russia than me. Whether it's our energy policy, which was not hers, whether it's the pipelines, as you know, in Europe, going all over the place, that I've been bitterly complaining about. I don't remember that. Whether it's Ukraine, whether it's a whole host of things. There has nobody ever been more tough or difficult for Russia than Donald Trump. Well, that was nonsensical. They've been trying for years to get it built, says the next segment. But we got approvals very quickly for the big LNG. $10 billion, the big LNG plan. What we've done in terms of energy, what we've done in terms of the military, what we've done in terms of Ukraine with, Obama used to give them pillows and blankets, and we gave them things that they can fight with, but then you withheld those things. So, F you. And then finally, you look at the pipeline exposing that going into Germany. And of course, whenever you do the look at, that's usually a tell that I didn't look at. You look at. You look at the pipeline. You look at oil with the number one. I mean, it is what we have done with energy and oil and gas and all that is all competition for Russia. You look at the Ukraine. You look at so many different levels. You look at our military. What? Look at the fact that we would have been powered by wind, which wouldn't have worked, by the way, because it only blows it sometimes, and lots of problems come about. I guess as opposed to Donald Trump, who blows it all the time. Anyway, so all that is nonsense, but the point is he keeps mentioning Ukraine and pipelines together. Whenever he gets one in mind, the other one comes to mind, even if it doesn't make any sense to insert mention of the other one, pardon me. But so he obviously mentally ties Ukraine and pipelines together. I think that's the point she's trying to make. Anyway, she continues on. My favorite part of all of this is when Kolomoisky, remember him? The billionaire advisor / patron to President Zelensky, said in an interview that Fruman and Parnas are scammers who go around Ukraine and collect money from people flaunting their friendship with Giuliani. And then Giuliani got real mad about it. So Giuliani told Fruman and Parnas to sue Kolomoisky. So they did. And guess what? He's their lawyer, too. So they did and claimed, they say on Rudy's advice, that when Kolomoisky said he would, quote, bring these two scammers to the light of day, unquote, that he committed the crime of attempted murder in so saying. And she includes Rudy's tweet. It says, an American analyst describes Kolomoisky as super dangerous. The notorious oligarch returned from a long exile and immediately threatened and defamed two Americans, Lev Parnas and Igor Fruman. They are my clients and I have advised them to press charges. Anyway, Simpson continues on and says, oh, God damn it, I just missed a perfect opportunity to say Giuliani advised them to file a jawsuit, as he was recently quoted as saying with a major typo in all of that. All right, so those were her October 2nd thoughts on the subject, and then she came back to it. Let me see, where did I park these things? On October 5th, she began in on this. When? 7:33. So in the evening of Saturday evening, she begins in by picking up on Yashar Ali's text here or tweet here that says, new, President Trump told House Republicans that he made his now infamous phone call to Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky at the urging of Energy Secretary Rick Perry. Greg told you about that. A call Trump claimed he didn't even want to make. So, reminder that the call was perfect. There's something wrong with it? Well, Perry made me do it. Trump's attempt, Susan writes, to blame Rick Perry for his call to Zelensky is hilarious, but there is an underlying truth to this new narrative. No, Perry isn't responsible for Trump coercing Ukraine into supporting his campaign, but LNG, liquid natural gas, one more time, is at the heart of the Ukraine scandal. Yes, I think it might be. She goes on to say, it's also why I've grown skeptical of the idea that the Ukraine scandal's supposed simplicity means it should be the focus of the House's impeachment inquiry. Yes, the corruptness of Trump's request to Zelensky is straightforward, but there's a much messier story underlying it. Different members of the Trump administration saw a liquid natural gas deal in Ukraine as a means to a different ends. But for Trump, exporting LNG to Ukraine was closely associated with his frequent and incorrect boasts about how America is now a net energy exporter, etc. She includes one of his tweets on the subject from September 16th. Because we have done so well with energy over the last few years, parentheses, thank you, Mr. President, 2 exclamation points, thanking himself, of course. We are a net energy exporter and now the number 1 energy producer in the world. We don't need Middle Eastern oil and gas, and in fact, have very few tankers there, but we'll help our allies. So, mishmash of thoughts there, but the key to that one, the claim that we're now a net energy exporter. Very important to him. Susan continues, it's also the thing Trump cites when he claims nobody has been tougher on Russia than him. While he's obviously wrong about the whole toughest on Russia part, Trump is right that this one area, probably the only area, where his policies, this is one area, where his policies are genuinely adverse to Russia. And I guess that's on the theory that American natural gas exports could replace Russian gas exports, at least in Ukraine. I mean, that's money in our pocket and not theirs, I guess. Unless, of course, the money that's netted by Trump cronies is being partially kicked back to Putin or Putin-allied oligarchs, which is always a possibility too. Anyway, to grossly oversimplify everything, she says, Russia has a lot of liquid natural gas that it supplies to Europe, and how reliant those European countries are on Russia for their total gas supply and what pipelines Russia uses to transport the LNG to them both have huge political ramifications. Ukraine's role in Europe's LNG politics is why Rick Perry and John Bolton were two of the heavy lifters when it came to the negotiations with the new presidential administration in Ukraine. And it's why they were involved in the negotiations in July with Ukraine's security chair. Included here is it looks like a Facebook post from Rick Perry with a photo of Bolton and Perry, and I don't know who else is in this lineup here, outside of the West Wing of the White House. Productive discussion at the White House with Ambassador Bolton. Ambassador Sondland, okay, is one of these doofuses here. I don't know if I could pick him out of a lineup just yet. I'm not quite used to his face. Ambassador Volker, also in there, and Ukrainian National Security and Defense Council Chair Alexander Danilyuk. Danylyuk. D-A-N-Y, Danylyuk. There we are. Got to just sound these things out one letter at a time. So I guess that's our lineup here. We have, there's Perry, there's Bolton. So one of these guys is Sondland, one of these guys is Volker, one of these guys is Danylyuk. And we are, let's see, Volker. I think we still have an extra person in here. Okay. Anyway, the discussions were apparently about opportunities for increased energy security cooperation with Ukraine under the Zelensky administration, back when they were still putting two Y's in his name. And that is of some interest there. Susan continues, back in May, when Perry was subbed in last minute for Pence to attend Zelensky's inauguration, yeah, it was in part a warning to Zelensky that he was being tested, but it was also because Perry was sent there along with Senator Johnson, my goodness, and Volker to discuss the liquid natural gas pipeline. What is included here? This is a screen grab of what exactly? The CEO of Naftogaz, Andrei Kobolev, met with the newly sworn president of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky. This is back in May. On May 20th, Kobolev attended a meeting between Zelensky and the U.S. delegation with Energy Secretary Rick Perry and a special representative in Ukraine, they said Walker, and Senator Ron Johnson. The topic of the talks was, among others, the creation of a permanent supply corridor for American LNG via Poland to Ukraine. Apart from President Zelensky and the CEO of Naftogaz, that's the Ukrainian natural gas, I've seen it referred to as the natural gas, state-owned natural gas monopoly there. But there are obviously other players in the natural gas arena, one of which they hoped would be the new startup from Parnas and Fruman, but so far, nothing. Anyway, the meeting was also attended by the president's advisors, Alexander Danylyuk and Ruslan Ryaboshkapa. The deputy foreign minister of Ukraine, Olena Zerkal, head of the Ukrainian delegation to NATO, Vadim Pristayko. Gas from Poland goes to Ukraine thanks to the PGNIG-ERU trading agreement. couldn't tell you what that's supposed to mean. The first LNG volumes also arrived there as informed by biznesalert.pl, I guess the Polish website, Business Alert. Okay, so that's how they plan to get the gas to Ukraine. Important to know. Side note, Susan continues, check out that attendance list from the Ukrainian side. Why on earth would Ruslan Ryaboshkova, an attorney, have been sent to an LNG meeting? Ryaboshkova, by the way, is also the guy Zelensky tapped to be his chief prosecutor. What do you know? Who will lead any investigation into Biden, if any should arise. So there you go. All of this negotiation over LNG pipelines and supply agreements is a normal part of politics. Yes, corruption is endemic to the LNG world, especially in the developing nations, but there's nothing inherently wrong with what Perry and Bolton were doing in these LNG talks with Ukraine. But what was happening in Ukraine wasn't just the usual LNG politics, because there was a monkey wrench that was interrupting the normal foreign policy process. That monkey wrench was Rudy Giuliani. Because Giuliani is the president's personal attorney, and he was in Ukraine operating on Trump's behalf. But Trump doesn't pay Giuliani. Trump isn't paying for Giuliani's work in Ukraine. A Ukrainian-American LNG company is paying Giuliani for all his work in Ukraine. Giuliani's actual client, his paying client, is Global Energy Producers. GEP's business is facilitating LNG export contracts to Ukraine, which means that it is also Giuliani's purpose in Ukraine, while simultaneously acting on behalf of the President of the United States, or so he claims. So he's there, and he's got divided loyalties at best. One, I'm here unpaid on behalf of the President. Two, I am here paid on behalf of a liquid natural gas company that wants to be able to export liquid natural gas to Ukraine. Whose work am I doing? Answer, both. That's a problem. Conflict of interest is an insufficient term for this abuse of power, Susan argues, because Giuliani was negotiating with the Ukrainians on Trump's behalf while also trying to help his clients score an LNG contract. All while Perry and Bolton are also negotiating with Ukraine on an LNG deal. GEP, the Global Energy Producers, or whatever the hell their name of their company is owned by Lev Parnas and Igor Fruman. They're the ones who got Giuliani in touch with Lutsenko, and who Giuliani sent to first make contact with Zelensky after his election. They're also the ones helping Giuliani in his quest to manufacture dirt on Biden in Ukraine. I mean, do you see how unusual this is, even if they're not helping him generate the dirt? It's weird. I'm a lawyer. I claim I have two different clients, maybe more, but for the moment, the universe we're concerned with is two clients. One is Global Energy Producers and their owners, Lev Parnas and Igor Fruman. And the other is President Trump. And I'm negotiating with Ukrainians on Trump's behalf about starting an investigation into this whole Biden conspiracy theory. At the same time, by the way, while I have your attention, can you please give liquid natural gas import contracts to my other two guys who have nothing whatsoever to do with all of this, who happen to be Ukrainian Americans, and P.S., they are also the ones who told me. Imagine not disclosing that, right? You're sitting there with the Ukrainian government, and you say, I got two pieces of business to discuss with you. One, I want an investigation started into Biden, or continued, or I want an investigation into why they didn't investigate Biden back then. Two, unrelated, I also need a natural gas contract for these two guys. P.S., I'm not telling you, these two guys who want to sell natural gas, it's not unrelated. They're the ones who told me that Biden should be investigated. They're the ones who came up with the theory under which I argue you should be investigating Biden. Right? At no point does we don't know. Does the Ukrainian government representative say, why should we be looking into Biden? Well, I'm told he made lots of money corruptly. He doesn't know anything about oil and gas. and yet he was on the Burisma board. And I know you think that there's something there with the executives in Burisma, at least the chief oligarch in chief there, is dirty. And so I wondered whether maybe Biden was dirty too. Okay, well, what do you have to go on that? Why did that? What makes you think that? The two guys who want the liquid natural gas contact, they told me. Because, I mean, you might ask, wow, your client is President of the United States? Yes, and I also have another client. Really? Who? Lev Parnas and Igor Fruman. Are they important? Yeah, sure. They're important guys. You should absolutely listen to them. Anyway, but they need something completely different. But, you know, the reason I represent them is they told me I could help some information that could help my other client, who I don't get paid by, Donald Trump. It's very bizarre. Mike Musson is commenting here. It sounds like Giuliani has a collusion of interest, not just a conflict of interest in Ukraine. Yes, there's collusion between his clients, absolutely, and he's facilitating it. There should be a firewall there at a minimum. Anyway, Susan Simpson continues by saying, since 2016, Parnas and Fruman have gotten millions in funding from an unknown source, which they have used to donate millions of dollars. I don't know if it reaches into the millions yet. To GOP campaigns and PACs. This, in turn, has given them a bit of access to some elected officials. There is the photo of Giuliani and Trump together with them. Pence, interestingly, is in this photo. Actually, was he cut out of the previous photo? It looks like they may have edited Pence out of the photo that I originally saw of the four of them that I mentioned, including in my own tweet about it. That's kind of odd all by itself. And then that was a picture I got from the Miami Herald's coverage of these two guys and their weird background down there in Miami. Yeah, let me scroll back a little bit further, all the way back to the second when I tweeted this thing out, because I do not remember Pence in that picture. I don't think that there's any particular significance to Pence not being in the picture or being edited out of the picture by the photo editors at the Miami Herald. But it is interesting. Yeah, it seems, it's cropped. I can see his shoulder in there. And that's interesting. I guess they were just wanting to focus on Parnas and Fruman and Trump and Giuliani. But there you go. Pence is right there in the picture. That is very interesting. We'll have to just keep that in mind, see whether we think that means anything in the future. All right, let's see. So where do we leave off on that? Let's see. We got down to here, and let's see. Oh, we did this one. All right, there we are. There we go. Sorry about that. So since 2016, Parnas and Fruman have gotten their millions of dollars, and we don't know where it's coming from, because most of their businesses, the Miami Herald told us, failed or were in bankruptcy or owed other people tens, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars, and they just weren't paying off on those things. They were in movie production. They were in some other crap. They had all kinds of weird companies, and they were all bogus. So where's the money coming from? And, of course, the power breakfast with Donald Trump Jr. and the Republican National Committee co-chair, whatever his name was, Tommy, what's his face? Can't remember his name. Let's see. More pictures with Trump and at various other functions. There's several. I mean, there's any number of pictures, some of which we've actually seen and talked about on the air before. Lev Parnas and Kevin Brady, other members of Congress. Okay. So, Susan continues on. There's so much more to talk about here. As you can see, it's taking all day here. And I will have to continue this thread tomorrow. And she does. But what needs to be emphasized is that Parnas and Fruman aren't just associates of Giuliani, to use the crime boss analogy there, as the New York Times euphemistically calls them. They're Giuliani's clients, and they want a liquid natural gas deal. Here she includes a clip of the New York Times article, House subpoenas Giuliani, Trump's lawyer, for Ukraine records. Of course, he doesn't appear interested in complying with that subpoena. And now I think I have marked here the continuation of her thread. Yes, to follow up on my thread from yesterday, she said yesterday. So it was a thread from Saturday that she followed up on Sunday. Here's a quick and dirty primer on why LNG deals are at the heart of the Ukraine scandal and why Trump is trying to blame Perry for the whole mess. Let's start with Lev Parnas and Igor Fruman of Global Energy Producers, LLC. The short story, they're professional scammers. The long story, start with the OCCRP's great profile of the pair. We've already referenced it and I think read through a part of it on the air, as well as the Miami Herald article, which we also read you on the air. Now, mind you, Susan Simpson, great sleuth. This is her tweet from 16 hours ago at this point, which puts it at, I'll open up the tweet itself so I can get the date stamp, 6:20 p.m. yesterday. And she's referring you to articles that I have read you on the air prior to the end of last week. Also check out Campaign Legal's complaint against Fruman and Parnas. That's a new one. With 2 links there. We'll follow up on that off the air and see whether it develops into a show for tomorrow or Wednesday. The professional background of Parnas and Fruman is mostly in scamming, with a particular focus on scams involving luxury goods, real estate, and movies. Of course, the shiny objects that rich people love. You got to defraud the rich people. That's where the money is. One of Parnas's companies is named Fraud Guarantee, which is a pretty straightforward description of his business practices. Remember? We talked about that. Parnas also has a company called Lone Crime Investigative. They don't even speak English very well. Though, to be fair, loan crimes do seem to be something Parnas actually has a great deal of experience in. And here's some screen caps of the various lawsuits he's named in. One thing Parnas and Fruman do not have a background in is energy, which actually is something that everybody accuses Hunter Biden of being guilty of, and it seems convincing to Republicans, but not in this case. So, it is strange that in 2018 they opened Global Energy Producers, LLC, a company that is allegedly, quote, transacting in LNG, oil and gas, and solar energy. That's interesting because energy is actually twice there, and that's a quote. GEP's business model is, as we read the other day, capitalizing on opportunities around the world by leveraging domestic and international relationships. In particular, as GEP stated to the Daily Beast, they're involved in exports of American LNG. That's what they do. Screen cap to prove it. There is no public record of GEP doing any actual business. In fact, the only public record of activity by GEP is making large donations to Republican candidates and PACs, which makes total sense because GEP is in no way capable of doing any real energy business on its own. As Parnas and Fruman told one investor who later sued them, GEP's business model is to make large donations to conservative politicians, which, quote, garnered substantial goodwill with various powerful political allies that would greatly assist the business of defendant GEP. That's taken, obviously, from one of the lawsuits against them. Parnas and Fruman, quote, partner with industry leaders, i.e. actual energy companies, and use their connections to Trump, i.e. paying for Trump's personal attorney to represent them in Ukraine, while he also represents Trump in Ukraine, to obtain energy contracts for their partners. That's the business model. It will be GEP's partners, whoever they are, that will actually be performing under any LNG export contracts that ultimately come together. And for GEP's efforts in making the deal come together, GEP will presumably get a cut of it. So, who exactly are GEP's partners? We don't know, but it matters a lot, she asserts. These LNG deals are arguably more political than economic in nature, and for the deals to happen, the U.S. government has to be trying to make them happen. So, who is paying Giuliani to make them happen. Since Trump came into office, United States LNG exports have quintupled. That might sound like a good thing, even. That's not an accident. Trump believes that foreign reliance on American LNG exports can be used to achieve U.S. foreign policy objectives. It might not even be totally stupid. As well as to fix the U.S. trade deficits he so despises. American LNG, though, can't compete on price with European energy, so this massive increase in U.S. exports has only been achieved with the help of U.S. foreign policy. Trump has been particularly heavy-handed in how he pressures foreign states to import American LNG. And Rick Perry, who's taking the name of his agency very literally, has been a major part of connecting U.S. LNG exporters to European markets. There's a Houston Chronicle article quoted here to back that one up. The foreign markets that are importing U.S. LNG have their own policy reasons for seeking out alternative energy sources, so it's not all about American pressure. But also, if they don't buy more expensive American LNG, Trump will punish them with tariffs.
From Daily Kos Radio on networksradio.com. You have been listening to the Kagro in the Morning Show
with David Waldman.
So now we've gotten into the real juicy part of it here, and there is a Forbes article that explains that relationship. We know about his mania for tariffs. We'll have to get back into this Tuesday, and then on Wednesday we'll have to do a pre-recorded show. Yom Kippur coming up. But for now, stay tuned for Justice Putnam and the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, cleaning up around the world.